Hello everyone, this is the X-Lite from FrSKY, the newest hotness to hit the market in radio control. I'm going to cut to the chase here a little bit so you don't have to watch a big long video if you don't want to, and I'm going to try to keep this as concise as possible. So when you look at something like this, you immediately think that it's for a thumber, and it's not. A pincher, such as myself, can use this very, very well. Matter of fact, you may not have known it, but in the fly egg review that I just did a few days ago, I was using this while flying that. And you probably didn't notice necessarily a definite change in my flying style if you're a long-time subscriber of the channel. And that was a bit of a proof of concept that this could be used by pinchers. Here a little bit later in the video, we'll take a look at some stick cam, which is a little bit humorous as well. I have seen one review of the X-Lite done by NJ Tech. You should go watch his review. He does quality reviews, and I think there's a lot of good information in his review that you can get that I may not cover in mine. But one thing that struck me about his review is apparently there's a number of other reviews out there, and in many of those reviews, those indicated that it was great for a thumber, just ideal, for a thumber, but it was not for a pincher, and I disagree with that completely. I have a $250 Taranis X-90 Plus with the carbon fiber, overlay sticker thingy and Hall sensor gimbals, and just, that thing is expensive, and I'm going to switch to this radio right here. I find this one great, and I see no reason to go back to the others. And I'm a pincher. I've been pinching, so if you're a pincher, you can use this radio. But I want to step back into maybe a possible flaw. This isn't a critique. I'm not trying to hate on or throw any shade at anyone who did a review that said it was great for a thumber and not for a pincher. But I have an idea of where they might be coming from. And it's just a little bit of what possibly could be construed as a flawed theory in the review of the radio. But the reason why I'm going into that is I'm a little bit curious. I'm wondering if those people who said it wasn't for a pincher were thumbers by nature. And if you're a thumber by nature, then it's going to feel more comfortable for you to do this, and it's going to feel very awkward to do this. And therefore it skews their point of reference. In my own case, not to say my own case is better, but I actually spent a fair bit of time being a thumber as a fixed-wing pilot. I actually dabbled in helicopters a little bit, and I switched to pinching then. I also did boats. I've had probably a 30-year lifespan on again and off again with RC, and I actually got into quads, and I was thumbing because this is comfortable. This is easy. I really didn't play a lot of video games with joysticks like this. I grew up in the days of Nintendo where you had D-pads like this. Joysticks were reserved for the arcade. If any of you remember arcades. And as I started, I was flying with thumbs, as I said, and then I kind of felt like I got stuck, or I plateaued, or at least I didn't feel like I was progressing as much as I should have for the time that I was putting in. So then I decided, after watching several videos and seeing people and pilots use pinching, to try to develop either my own style of pinching or to just give pinching a try. And I found that my flight got better. I also felt more in control. I felt more precise. I felt like I felt like I was more attuned with what I needed to do and what the quad was doing. And so I've stuck with it ever since. But going from the typical square box radio that we've had all these years to something like this is going to take a bit of adjustment. I'm not going to say it feels awkward or weird. It just takes a bit of adjustment. And my biggest adjustment was not the gimbals, it was not the form factor, but actually the switches. So if we see here up at the switches, we've got 3 position switches here, we've got 2 position switches here, and we also have these, and then there's an antenna you can connect here if you want to get into the details. Typically when I fly, I would disarm here. I would want to disarm quickly for a crash, or as I would land, I'd bring the throttle down, and then I would just kind of separate. But I found in continuing to try to use a switch in this area for my disarming that I would actually end up raising the throttle as I reached for this switch up here. And then I tried reversing the switch. I tried a couple of different things. Typically I just go down to disarm. So I spent an afternoon flying with different configurations, and what I found was that actually with my finger here and holding the radio with the bottom 2 fingers, or not my bottom 2, my last 2 fingers, my pinky finger and my ring fingers, that it felt very comfortable. I felt at ease with the position in my hand. Again, I felt under control, and I also felt that this finger was in good enough position to where I could arm easily and I could disarm easily. And I found that I didn't raise the throttle. Obviously, there's a disconnect in my hands. So I found that when I would try to land, that I could get the throttle to keep going down. And then as I got down to that last little bit, those last couple inches before we put the quad on the ground, that I could disarm. And I didn't raise, and I didn't do any flicking with this stick either. So in all the different manners that you might look at this and wonder if it's for you or not, That was my biggest hurdle, was switch position. The second question you might have, because I do have a number of different radios. I have a Devo 7E, I have the Jumper T8SG, I had the QX7. I really couldn't stand that one. That was way too big and bulky for me. I've had the Devo, did I mention the Devo 7E, which is a smaller radio? The Devo 10, I've had the Taranis X-90 Plus, and that was also a big hulking. I think that my adjustments was less for this radio than it was for the X-90 Plus. The size of the X-90 Plus took much more getting used to than getting used to this. This fits comfortably in your hand. It's easier to carry. There's all sorts of bonuses of this size and form factor that you could count out for each individual pilot and your needs. But if you're a pincher, there's no reason to shy away from this. Give yourself a weekend of flying. Give yourself ample of time of just getting adjusted. Find out where your comfort spot is and get everything adjusted just so you like it. Maybe rethink your switches like I did. But this works fine for pinchers. There's no reason why a pincher can't use this radio. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details. It has OpenTX on it. You use OpenTX just like we have for all the years. We do drive it a bit differently because we now have this joystick down here, and I find this joystick to be great, outstanding, nearly perfect, at least for me when it comes to creating new models and manipulating the configuration of the models. I find this to be much more native, much easier to get used to. And then you have these other two buttons that operate as a shift and an exit or a back button. I tend to use the joystick primarily and then just use this to exit back to what I was previously at. We'll get into the menuing system just a little bit and the joystick, because there's one particular thing I do think you need to see. This has nice gimbals in it. I have nothing to complain about there. You'll notice they're smaller than they are in a traditional radio. They're pretty much smaller than all other radios except for those real small form factor radios. And the sticks are relatively short. And we'll get into one of my complaints about the sticks, but it's fairly minor. Like I said, I've been using this for quite a while. We have the D-pad down here, and this gets into your trims. You can adjust the trims. We typically don't do that with quads, but if you have a need to, you can adjust the trims. And to switch from one gimbal to the other, you press and hold this down, and it switches over to the gimbal. We have the switches up here we've already covered. As far as the exterior finish, this stuff feels like your favorite blanket or something, what you roll up to on a Sunday afternoon when you have nothing to do and you take a nap. It's just so soft and smooth, and then you have these gray areas under here that are a little bit more tactile and sticky, so you can safely hold the radio. Also, while we're at the back, we have these holes across the back, and I believe it's the inside holes that adjust the tension for your gimbal. So like when you get it, they'll both be centered, so you'll have to make an adjustment with those screws to keep it from centered. I wanted my sticks to be fairly loose. I didn't want to feel any sort of stiffness in there, but I also wanted it to stay down at the bottom. But I ran into a problem when adjusting the gimbals with those hex drivers, is that my throttle stick would bump back up. I'd push it down and it'd come back up. And I was like, well, what's going on there? So I took the radio apart, which isn't a big deal. You take out, well, how I did it was I took off one of the ends, and we have a battery. We'll get into the battery in a second. Hopefully you can see right there we have two little separations between the top half and the bottom half, and so you start there and you start prying things apart. You probably need two tools, so you start there with one, get a little gap, and then you work another one up. There's a couple of clips here on the side and about this area, and we have to snap those apart. It makes that blood curdling snap that makes you think you've broken something, but we haven't. You work yourself around the radio and doing the same thing. It really didn't take long. But what I found once I got the two halves apart was that there was a cable back here, and the cable wasn't taut or tight. It was actually, there was slack in the cable. There was a little bit of a bump or a loop, but it just wasn't quite enough. So I pulled on that cable to the gimbal side ever so slightly, maybe 1/4 of an inch, and then I put it all back together, and I found that that kept my throttle from bumping back up. You may have to do the same, you may not. They may make an adjustment between at the factory between the runs that I have mine and the runs that you get yours if you don't have one already. Back to the battery a little bit of a non-standard. This is a this is an 18500 versus an 18650, which is typically more popular in our hobby. It's not a big con for me because I don't have a lot of 18650s around, so buying a set of 18500s wasn't a huge deal. I got this off of Amazon. They're 1600 milliamp rated. I don't know if that's true or not. You're going to find various milliamps for these batteries. The higher they go, in my opinion, the less reputable the manufacturer is. It also came with a charger, EBL branded, whoever they are. You slide. You can charge either batteries. If you have 18650s you want to charge by chance, you can use this charger as well, or you can just buy batteries and use your 18650 charger. This goes red when it's charging, green when it's done, and it does have a little clip here on the back to where you can make it nice and compact if you put it in a bag. I'll link this down below if you're interested in picking up a similar set. As you can see from the bottom here, we've got our little minus symbol. Hopefully you can see that. And so that indicates the minus side, which has the stripe here, goes out. And when we slide that in, you can see that it doesn't jiggle around even with the cap end off. You only jiggle it when I do it that way, but it fits in there nice. It's not going to rattle around in your hand. And then you kind of just line up our end, and then you turn it and it stays secure. I didn't have any problems with those turning in my hands in my flight, so I don't suspect any of you will have problems. It kind of knocks into place and it feels relatively secure. We do have a module area in the back. That's here. Of course, it's not the standard size, so that might be a bummer for you, something you need to consider. So I suspect FrSKY and other manufacturers will be coming out with modules that fit in the back shortly if they're not out already. Down at the bottom here, just to quickly go over the ports, we've got our SD card, which I've already got filled. It is a spring-loaded SD card holder. We've got our USB ports, a micro USB, and that is not for charging. That is just for manipulating the software on the radio. We've got a servo connector down here so you can flash firmware to your receivers, and then we've got a 9mm audio port down there as well. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to be quiet so you can hear it.
Welcome to OpenTX.
And I was quiet because I felt it important to hear that, because I think this speaker is better than it is on my X9D Plus. But that's just me. I'm not a guy who listens to high fidelity music or anything like that, but it just sounded better. I've got the same amber pack on both of them. This just sounded better, but I haven't listened to music on this. That's just not my thing. Many people, speaking of music, will use these for volume controls when they are listening for music. There's YouTube videos you can look up for doing that, storing your music on your SD card and playing it through the radio, which is a neat feature, but it's not one that I have pursued. So once you've got the radio boot up, the primary thing that you need to do to manipulate it is just to press the joystick to the right. You get in here and you can select different models. And then you see it's highlighted here on the page, and you just can manipulate that. Once you go down here, you can no longer press left or right to manipulate the pages. You have to go back up. Whoops, went too far. Back up to where the page is highlighted, and then you can go forward and back. And then you press down to change something. Like you say you want to edit this one, and then you would do that. I'm not going to in my case, but I think this joystick, it feels good, it works good. The texture that they have on the end, it grips your hand, it doesn't really give you any fits. You don't feel like you're gonna slip off or anything of that nature. You also see that I've got 3 different models in here. At one point in time I had 4, so I must have overwritten one of them. But I flew the Fly Egg, like I said, and then I flew the Hornet, which is the HGLRC Hornet, and I also flew the Diatone M2. I spent most of my time flying the Hornet with this. I'm not a fan of the power button. I think that's the way forward, though. I do think most manufacturers are going to move to this kind of soft touch or digital power button. I prefer the mechanical button, but I think, I'm going to have to move along with the times, and we're going to go to this button. So on and off is pretty much the same. You have to long press, and then it goes off and it makes that little noise on the speaker. This does also come with a case. Let's take a quick peek at that. This is pretty much the material you would expect, if that sounds familiar to you. It does not have a handle. Oh, mine's a little dirty. And it does have the zipper, and we have these little, no, I don't know what you'd call those things. I guess you could hook some sort of strap to it if you wanted to have that sort of carrying style. So it comes with this little top pouch. We get a manual and some stickers in the top. You don't really need this. It's just kind of, it comes with the shipping. We have some gimbal protectors, so when you're traveling around, you have those already. You don't have to buy those separate. These are the little soft pieces that cover the screws that you place in the back. Hopefully you can see there, they do come in different lengths, so you may find, like I did, I think I put one in wrong in mine, so it doesn't quite make it smooth in the back, so you may need to use more than one, but luckily we have more than one set that's in there. There's also this heat shrink here, but I'm not certain what that's for. Here's a quick look at the case where the X-Lite goes. We do have this foam piece here on the top, and then we have this little reservoir here that we can use for storing various other components that you might want to take with you, or you can keep the little baggie in there like I do. The next thing I'd like to show you is the stick cam, and it's a little bit funny because I found that after I'd filmed, I actually flew a few packs, and then I found that when I looked at the stick cam, it was kind of like this. And I thought, oh no, I hold my radio wrong. So I went back in, I got a different machine, I grabbed the X9D Plus, and I came back out. And then when I reviewed that footage, I found that I held the X9D Plus like this too. So it's a little bit humorous. I didn't know this. I had never done a stick cam before, but apparently I don't hold my radio flat. And you might not either, but because when we're in the goggles, we just don't look at those things. When I'm flying line of sight, I think I do hold it flat. So let's go ahead and take a look at the stick cam. So we've covered the radio, we've covered its primary features. Now let's get into the cons a little bit. There aren't many to cover, but let's do it. First is the sticks. I wish there were other stick options. I think that's a complaint that's just early in the life of the radio. I fully expect that we will see other stick options come from third parties and from FrSKY. And the only reason why I would like to see that is because I think some people, including myself, I would like to at least experiment with longer sticks, and I would also like the taper to start further down so that the flat area at the primary part of the stick end extends further down. And I think the main reason why I would like to try that is I'm wondering if on full throttle, if I would have a benefit of that just being a little bit more substantial at the bottom half instead of having the taper. In my flying, it didn't really affect me, but I like to tinker and try new things, and I'm willing to spend, $4 to $10 on another set of stick ends in order to see if that helps me in some manner. Speaking of the stick ends, these aren't separated. They're not two-piece stick ends. They're just one-piece stick ends. So when you screw them down, that is kind of the place where they reside. You can't adjust them up like we can other stick ends. That's another thing I would like to see out of the stick ends that come to market. I mentioned the battery already, but that's another con while we're talking about them. I think that'll be a con for more people than it is actually for me, but it is worth mentioning. I think another thing that could be a con is the short throws of the gimbals. And it didn't really, you've already seen the stick cam. It didn't really affect me. It was just another one of those things where I needed to make an adjustment. So I needed a few packs. I needed to kind of calm my nerves a little bit, and I needed to spend some time with the radio. And I think that's true regardless. If you were to come from a different radio, say you had a FrSKY, an i6S, I think that's what they're called, i6S, which is a pretty thin radio, and then you jump to an X90 Plus, a Taranis X90 Plus, there would be an adjustment period. And that kind of brings me to one of the flaws of those other reviews, if they hold true. I haven't seen them, but how much time did they give the radio in their hands before they made the review? I think it's really a disservice to be first. I know that YouTube rewards first because, quite frankly, people are excited about a new product and they want to see what other people think. They want to see it in someone's hands. They want to get to know the features and pros and cons of people that have used it before they make their own purchase. But unfortunately, that first sort of rush, in my opinion, it means you forget things, or you don't cover it completely, or you're just a little bit off in your assumptions because it was so quick. So not that I think I can do anything about it, but I think as a community, we would be much better served if, not just in radios or X-Lites, but when we're making reviews, if there's any sort of opportunity to make an adjustment to ourselves in order to show the equipment or machine that we're showing, I think we should take that opportunity. That's personally kind of something I do. I tend to fly things for quite a while. I've said this before. I had the Fly Fox, the 3-incher from my RC Mart for probably 2.5 months before I did the review on it. But others, I've been more focused. Like I had the leader for about 2.5 weeks before I did that review. So it varies. It depends on how focused I am on something as well. I need to step off my soapbox before everybody gets mad at me here. That's the basic genesis of this radio. If you're a thumber, I think it would probably work fine. You know, I've thumbed. I haven't thumbed in a long time, and I didn't try to thumb when I was out flying. But for a pincher, you can definitely adjust to this. It's not that big of a deal. It's just like adjusting to any new radio that's not exactly like the one that you're currently using. And again, to repeat myself, my biggest adjustment was adjusting for the switch position, not the physical shape. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise about this radio, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.